Hello and welcome to Women in Retail Talks. I'm Christina Stidham, Digital Content Director at Women in Retail Leadership Circle. Today I'm joined by Catherine Ham, founder and CEO of Bearaby, a multi-million-dollar direct-to-consumer company selling sustainable, breathable, weighted blankets. In this episode, we're discussing Catherine's journey to launching the rapidly growing brand, how she's keeping up fulfillment with a reliable supply chain, how she prioritizes sleep and self-care for herself and her employees, and much more. So Catherine, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Christina. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So to get started, can you first tell us about Bearaby, your products, and what inspired you to launch the business?
Sure. So I launched a business in December 2018. And I was actually, when I launched the company, I used to be a regular employee who was just sleep deprived and frankly exhausted. So I was traveling a lot for my previous job at the World Bank. And I was just looking for a natural sleep solution as I was struggling with sleep. And I had tried a lot of different things that just didn't work for me. And I came across weighted blankets, which is not a new concept. They actually have been around since many years in the medical circles. And I read in a medical article, like a small sentence that talked about how these kind of medical in clinical devices or blankets that are designed for sensory disorders in children could also help adults sleep. And I got one in a specialty store. And, the first time I tried it out, I napped for 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon. So I was sold. And that's kind of how the business started.
That sounds lovely. Yeah, I'm sure many of our listeners can understand struggle with sleep and being tired from working. So I read that when you first launched, you couldn't find a manufacturer. So you actually knit the first few Bearaby blankets yourself and came up with their design and made them yourself. So can you tell more of that story, how you got those first couple of products out, your struggle there with the manufacturing, and how your business has grown since then?
Yeah, that's correct. So traditionally weighted blankets are made with little filler beads, like plastic beads that are just sewn in pockets between two layers of fabric. And I think one of the biggest issues I had with the blankets that were in the market at that point were that they were just not breathable and they were not designed for a lifestyle consumer who wants to sleep under it for 8 hours. And that's why the breathability and temperature control was my biggest issue. But at that point, there was just no such design out there, and nobody had actually thought about, is there a way that we can actually make a heavy blanket without these artificial filling materials? So when I was looking for a manufacturer, I looked first into bedding, and they said, "You're crazy. We're trying since many years to make the blankets lighter. Why would you even make a heavy blanket?" So they didn't kind of get the concept in the first place. And then I was looking into fashion manufacturers, and obviously it was like in the middle. And I just realized, like, manufacturers said, "Well, I would love to make those for you, but I don't know how, and we don't have the machinery for it." So, and that's kind of what led me to develop the first prototypes myself, which was literally in my living room, where I got rolls of fabric and I started cutting them and realizing, like, if you build you roll the fabric and you get like a very thick yarn just made out of organic cotton fabric, and you knit it together, that you get a heavy blanket that's at the same time breathable. And the more I was knitting it, the more I realized it actually looks also pretty beautiful. So it was a pretty tedious work. It takes hours to make these blankets. So I created a first small prototype, and then I was looking around, and that actually led me to find my first step before actually manufacturing them myself was to see how we can automate the whole yarn making process. And it had to go down to like that route that I partnered with someone, a manufacturer, who where we rented a small garage. We put our yarn machines in, and we had 5 knitters at the beginning, and we just kind of started knitting the blankets. So yeah, that's how it started. And when we grew our production, I think the good thing about being so scrappy and having to do everything ourselves is that we really kind of learned the ins and out and kind of how to really make the products, how to tweak them and to become really agile. So when we grew the business, it was very natural for us then to actually train our second supplier and bring our machines and allowed some form of ownership of our supply chain and processes so we can manage it end to end because we really understand it because we made the blankets from scratch and we still could do if we wanted to kind of moving it to the next supplier.
Yeah, wow. So you really bootstrapped it up from the ground up there. And it sounds like you got a great chance to kind of fully understand the products and all the different selling points. I mean, you're right. They look beautiful. They're cool to the touch. And you kind of got to see that come to life like right in your own homes. That's awesome. And that goes right into my next question, talking about fulfilling these orders, as you mentioned, as the brand grew and you're doing it yourself. Bearaby products are in high demand with nearly 40,000 consumers on a wait list for one of your blankets, which is crazy and amazing. So congrats on that. But let's talk about fulfilling these orders. I'm sure that is a bit overwhelming and challenging. How did you build a reliable supply chain as you got all these orders and increased production? And how has the COVID-19 pandemic brought on even more new challenges?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. So when we had our wait list with 40,000 consumers, that's when we were just about like migrating from our small facility to our bigger facility in India. So I think what I realized pretty early on is that we need to have a diversified supply chain. And I think having that in place just before COVID really fully started helped us to navigate the process because when one manufacturer had problems and was down, we could rely on the other manufacturer. So I think that was one point. For us, from a consumer standpoint, it can be pretty frustrating for consumers to be on that wait list. And we were sending out emails to basically inform people that there is a wait list, and also we try to keep them on track on when the product was coming in. And I think one of the things that led to more frustration was that when we had a restock and we sent that email to people, the blankets are back, we send it on East Coast time, and the blankets were literally sold out sometimes within minutes or within like a couple of hours, but definitely before the West Coast was awake. So we got into that dynamic where people on the West Coast would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning just to secure one of the blankets. And people got more and more frustrated. So what we did is one thing is that we customized the wait list even further. So instead of just having people sign up that they want a blanket, we built like a little back-end platform where you can select exactly the color and the weight that you're waiting for, that you want to buy. And that helped us to streamline the production because we could really produce more targeted for the demand that was on the wait list. And the second thing we did was to shift our launch times late in the day so that really people could sleep in and we don't produce additional anxiety on getting the product, which is ironic given that our product is supposed to calm people and bring mindfulness. So I think taking out that stress of an early launch and targeting more the list for our manufacturing, these were like two really important points that helped us to navigate the heavy crunch during the COVID time.
Yeah, that's a great idea and it makes total sense to get that insight into what products exactly they're waiting for so you could focus on those if something was more in demand than others. So let's talk about sustainability. I don't think that many people would immediately realize that the average blanket is so bad for the environment. We talk a lot about plastic and different things like that, but a blanket, how did you recognize that sustainability in your products would be an important issue for Bearaby to address?
I mean, I think once I started to learn more about like the weighted blanket category, I realized that 90% of the products were made out of synthetic fabrics. And then on top of that, they are filled with plastic beads. So to get a blanket heavy, you on average use 20 pounds. So you have a synthetic blanket that's filled with 20 pounds of small plastic filling materials. And if they're not used anymore, they somewhere land up in a landfill and they never decompose. I think that's one of the things that we wanted to address, and I think we organically addressed it by just using organic fabrics that are fully biodegradable. You can even compost our blankets. So we have that circularity element as the core of our business, as the core of our product. But one thing I think coming out from an outsider in the whole like manufacturing space and shipping industry is that usually every item in a supply chain gets wrapped multiple times in plastic. So once it gets into the container, and then once it gets out from the container to store, and then again there is another plastic wrap in many instances when it gets shipped to the consumer. And that just sounded so wasteful for me. And I asked kind of at that point maybe a stupid question of like why do we actually need to ship everything in plastic? And at that point I just got the answer, well, that's just how it's done, and it's been done like that forever. And so I said like just it felt so wasteful for me. And I mean, with the plastic pollution that's going on, I just didn't want to have that in the business. So I was thinking on what we can try. And so we came up with a sustainable packaging solution where we just used cartons, recycled cartons, which we have in multiple layers. So basically we started with a small trial. Is that feasible to use that and have like the same experience and quality that we can deliver to the consumer? And by figuring that out and piloting it again on smaller scale, when we're just bootstrapping, we realized that we don't need the plastic and that we can deliver the same experience and have a completely plastic-free supply chain. And so, yeah, I mean, that's something we had from the beginning. And now that we're scaling, it's something that I think consumers recognize and they value. And it's become part even of the unboxing experience. And people are saying, well, it's great at Bearaby that there's a product that's not wrapped in plastic. So that's been a really big, important point for the business. And I want to keep that 100% in all the things as we're scaling up, making sure that we stick to that core mission, how we started off.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that you kind of pushed back there, fought for more sustainable packaging. I know that's become a huge discussion in the last year or 2, 3 years in the retail industry of shipping and packaging. Do we need to wrap everything 17 times? So I'm very glad to hear that you found a way to go around it and still preserve that customer experience. And talking about, you know, that customer experience, what you sell, you don't just sell a weighted blanket. You sell self-care and a great night's sleep that's drug-free. So I was looking at your website and I see this messaging everywhere. You know, enjoy a great night's sleep. You don't have to take medicine. It's great for napping, self-care. So can you talk about your marketing strategy for the brand and how content marketing comes into play? Because I noticed that Bearaby has a blog.
Definitely. So I think I'm glad that I think now that people are more open to talk about self-care. And I think overall social media and like people became more authentic, and we don't want to see like these highly curated feeds on Instagram anymore. And for me, it was when I first kind of got marketed the blankets in the traditional category, it just always suggested that something is wrong with you. So there's like something, it's a disorder, or, you know, if you can't sleep. And I wanted to really create something that's joyful, a brand that's joyful, and where you can, that destigmatizes basically sleep, and making it kind of a centerpiece in your living room. So I think that's one piece of kind of very colorful and very joyful brand that talks very openly about like what we're struggling with. And I think another element also is kind of that burnout or badge of honor of working very long hours. And so we also said napping and kind of the whole culture of resting is something that is part of our product. So messaging that and really allowing people to talk freely. And I mean, in my own experience, I love napping. But in my previous job, I never could talk about that, or it was not even an option that you could take a small break for a nap. So I think talking about that and saying, well, you can actually build a business, you can run a business, but you can still take naps. And there is an element of self-care and success, and it doesn't need to be excluding each other. That was important for me to also tell other female founders. And how the blog comes into place, it's definitely like the category itself. We want to educate people. We want to educate obviously around our product, but then all the elements that are important to us, self-care, sleep, napping, sustainability, we build those into our content strategy. So if you look for the brand, we don't want to be only a brand that sells weighted blanket, but we want to be part of a larger conversation, and that has an impact, and that kind of gets what people are saying and gets what people are thinking, and kind of driving that forward, which is already, I think, going into the dialogue that's already going into the right direction.
Great. And my next question is actually going to be talking about holiday season, because it's upcoming very quickly. I know in 2020, Bearaby had led an anti-Black Friday campaign, preventing consumers from buying blankets on the shopping holiday to encourage more mindful purchasing decisions, which is, you mentioned that earlier. Your brand very much is about mindfulness and self-care and making sure consumers are really thinking about their purchases and sustainability. So is there anything in store for 2021's holiday season that's similar, or any other holiday season strategies that you can share for this upcoming season?
Yes, we're actually working on a Black Friday campaign, which is actually based on what we've done last year and based on some of the learnings that we've had during the campaign. So we literally, like, we made a bit fun on launching a black blanket on Black Friday, and kind of like really counteracting on like these big sales strategies that a lot of like kind of consumers are drawn into or pushed into. But what we also did is, so we basically made people sleep on their purchase. So we wanted to create like a Black Friday sale, or Black Friday that's completely mindful. There's no sale, there are no discounts, and there's actually no product there. And one of the things, we work together with Duke University and their Center for Mindfulness. So we wanted to create not only like a sleep on it experience, but we also wanted to see how actually could purchasing on an e-commerce platform be made more mindful, because usually all like the strategies that currently are used or that are traditionally used are actually against mindfulness. You're kind of pushing people down a sales funnel, you're following up with like maybe emails, and like you're constantly into people's inbox. So how we were thinking, how could we actually take out some of that pressure and anxiety? And so we took that Black Friday campaign and started measuring mindfulness in terms of taking a pause. So we actively made people pause before the purchase checkout, after they had slept on the for the purchase. So basically ask people, do you really need that product? Do you need a second blanket, or is that maybe something you don't even need? And then we ask people when they checked out how they're feeling right now. And that's actually something like, when you think about mindfulness, there are many ways on how you can get into a state of mindfulness, but taking a conscious pause is one of that. And so we wanted to create that on our e-commerce checkout experience. So you would be asked on taking a small pause, and on top of it, we would check in with you how you're feeling right now, because that also translates into getting people into a mindful state. So, and then we tracked and looked into like, how are people actually feeling when they're going through purchasing our blankets. And we had a lot of people that felt good, that were happy, that were grateful, but then there was a majority of people that were anxious. And tracking that over time, we realized that anxious purchases were actually spiking during the time around Black Friday. And so we realized that that basically kind of having a sale in itself is something that leads to anxiety, and there is an overall state of anxiety related to Black Friday. So what we will be doing this year is kind of taking some of the pressure out. I don't want to kind of give away too much, but we will take some of the findings that we had in the study last year and actively incorporating that. And again, we want to see how people feel and react during Black Friday, and hopefully we're able to take more anxiety and pressure during these hectic holidays out and bring more mindfulness during the purchasing process.
Wow, that is so interesting, especially to learn from what happened last year. And it really is a unique take on it, because every other brand out there is pushing the sale, get in your last 5 purchases before midnight, and the sale moves on. So it's very, very different, unique take to kind of say, hey, let's take a pause. Are you sure you need 2 blankets? Maybe you could only have 1. That is really interesting, and it shows your customers that you're really thinking about them, and you're kind of following through on your brand mission, as you said, to cause less anxiety. So I'm excited to see what you come up with for this year. So it sounds really interesting. So let's pivot a little bit to talk about leadership. So Bearaby's mission champions rest, self-care, everything we've been talking about. For you as a leader, how do these practices come into play for your employees, and also how do you act on them yourself?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of napping. I grew up in Germany, where I think it's much more common to take afternoon naps than it is in the US. So once I started studying in the US and started working in the US, I realized that kind of culture shift. And so when I started in my job, I still felt that I wanted to take a nap, but I definitely would have been the only one. So I was always living really close to my workplace, and then when other people went for lunch, I was actually sneaking out to take a quick afternoon nap. But then there was this feeling of being guilty, around it, or being a lazy employee, which was definitely not the case, because in that hour that, around lunchtime, it's actually studies and scientific studies show that we are less productive and we actually make more mistakes. So when I founded Bearaby, I wanted to address some of these things head on, and just create a culture where people don't have to feel guilty around managing their own time. And that starts with, for me, it might be napping, but for someone else, it's picking up their kids at the time where, there might be still meetings going on, or someone else wants to walk their dog. So one of the things that we introduced is core working hours, and we did that actually even before COVID, where we specified between 10:30 and sometimes we pivot between 1:30 and 2:30, depending on kind of the time of the year, but we specify core working hours where we want to be available, and that's where we hold most of our meetings. So that allows basically a free time in the morning, because there are people just from your natural rhythm that are morning people that get their best work done in the morning. And then there are people who prefer to work later, that get most creative at night. So why would we kind of set these strict boundaries for people and kind of not let them do their best work? And plus, I think another thing we realized is, if you have these meetings distributed across the day and you have 30 minutes in between meetings, you can't do any deep work. So for us, kind of bundling, that's the time where we have meetings, and the rest we can flexibly pivot around the specific lifestyles, has really helped us navigate during the COVID time, where there were just more demands. Everyone was working from home and had to take on additional responsibilities. So kind of having these flexi hours and everyone being used to the flexi hours is something that, really proven to be successful, and just shows a level of trust that we can incorporate, and allowing people just to be their best at work and being authentic at work.
I absolutely love that. Totally makes sense. If you're more productive between 4 and 6 p.m., then you should take that opportunity, and you should be allowed to have that freedom of when you're getting your work done, especially as you mentioned, when we're all at home, and you're not required to come into the office anyway. So, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of like loyalty and appreciation from your employees with that initiative as well.
We do. In terms of turnover, it absolutely pays off, and I think general satisfaction level and the kind of the creativity, and I think what we get out, like in feedback from our designers, for example, who've done some really amazing campaigns, among others the Black Friday campaign. I think if you're well rested and kind of you have the ability to kind of take the time also for creative pauses, you just get more creative and better work. And I think we really see that.
Yeah, I love that. So you are truly leading through your brand mission. And I think that's so important in today's world. People want to see that authenticity, and they want to see that come through in their leadership as well. So lastly, what's next for you personally and at Bearaby? You've talked about the upcoming Black Friday campaign. How about looking into 2022? What's next?
So we just launched at Nordstrom 2 weeks, which was very exciting. And we've worked for a long time on the concepts on how can people experience the brand in the wild, and especially for people who never heard about weighted blankets and how we can create like a seamless experience. So I think that will be a focus for the next couple of months, and really building out our retail presence so people can experience the brand in the store and actually discover weighted blankets. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about. We also have a couple of new cool products that we will be launching next year, where I'm very passionate about, which addresses some of the things that we've been facing while working from home, where we think, again, we can bring like an element of wellness and relaxation into people's home. So yeah, lots in the making.
Amazing. That is really exciting. Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for joining me on this episode of Women in Retail Talks. And I'm excited to see what Bearaby does as it goes into 2022 and continues to grow. So thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at womeninretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.